Welcome to a new edition to the Paperweights podcast. We are titling this section Short Stack for now. And what it is a shorter form podcast. And we are using it as an opportunity to shed our thoughts on other books that we may be reading. And we won't be doing chapter by chapter with. So we'll kind of give a brief overview of what the book is about, what we liked about it, what we didn't like about it, and allows us to share our thoughts on more books and hopefully uh, give you, the listeners, an opportunity to uh, expand your reading repertoire as well. And so, without further ado, this is going to be the first episode in that series. And we're not sure how frequently we will be doing these, but I will turn this over to Justin.
Welcome to Paperweights, the podcast where two self-proclaimed gym rats and shooting enthusiasts delve into the world of literature with a sprinkle of humor. Although their biceps could crush a walnut, don't let that intimidate you. They also have a nerdy side. Mike and Brandon have a voracious appetite for reading, particularly in the fantasy genre, and they want to share their passion with you. So grab your protein shake and your favorite novel and join us for a humorous and insightful journey into the world of books with Paperweights.
Hello and welcome to a special single edition of Paperweights. I'm your host Justin, and this is a episode about War and Peace. I recently finished it, and I wanted to talk about it because it's really good and interesting. And Brandon had not read it at all, so he's kind of pointless for him to be on. So I'm going to talk about it. This is not going to be a normal podcast. We're not going to go chapter by chapter or anything like that. I've basically going to give my thoughts. I've broken it down into a couple of sections that we're going to go through, and we'll see how it goes. Basically, we're going to go from what is War and Peace, kind of describing it and everything like that. We're going to second say why I read it and The Hero of Our Lord 2025. And I'm going to discuss what I liked about it, maybe some things I didn't like about it. And I'm going to do some tips for reading it because it is a thick book with lots of Russians in it. Then I'm going to do some final thoughts, some maybe talk about a little bit of the adaptations that I've seen. I haven't seen that many. And yeah, so just going to go through my thoughts on War and Peace. This big ass novel. This is one of the volumes of it. So we'll start off with what it is. It is a gigantic novel written by Leo Tolstoy in like 1865, I think. Basically, it is a novel chronicling some of Napoleon's later conquest. It has the Battle of Austerlitz in it. Basically, it goes from like 1805 to around 1813, if you know your history with Napoleon. So you get big, big battles of Austerlitz and Borodino and the burning of Moscow and all that sort of stuff. So you have that. And then it has a couple of kind of macro parts to it. So you can think of it as you have the character section with all the great characters like Andre and Pierre and Natasha and all of them. And you have those are split up into two sections, the war and the peace. Ironically enough, the war sections have details of the battles and stuff like that. Then you have the other thing, which is more of the historical section. Basically, Tolstoy has, before a lot of the major events, he'll have this kind of God level view telling you kind of what the actions about to happen. So it'd be like the Battle of Borodino, blah 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 blah. Give you kind of the layout before you actually get into the character POVs of the things. And then you also have another kind of section that he likes to do where it's kind of Tolstoy's musings on philosophy. A lot of it is his musings on history, like the great men of history kind of thing. He likes to he subscribes to a lot of like history is going through lots of minute decisions that kind of he's more a trends and forces guys, if you know what that means of history. A lot of minute decisions, a lot of things that was out of the great men's of power hands that then forced them to do stuff. And that's kind of so you have a lot of breakdowns on his views of history and a little bit of philosophy in between the more kind of character driven sections of the book. If you want to know, this is his. It's at the end of this volume, but it's in his words of what War and Peace is. He says, "Quote: What is War and Peace? It is not a novel. Even less is it a poem, and still less a historical chronicle. War and Peace is what the author wished and was able to express in the form in which it was expressed. So it's kind of just, it's a very weird novel because it's like part novel, part history, part philosophy intertwined with all these different aspects. I'll get more into kind of what I enjoy about it as we move forward in the podcast. But that's kind of the general overview. You can think of it like a chronicle of the events, basically a little bit before the Battle of Austerlitz to at the end of basically the retreat of Napoleon from Moscow and all that. And then there's an epilogue which goes way farther into the future, but that would be a little bit spoiled. I'm going to try not to spoil the book. It is like 200 years old, so we'll see. But I'm not going to do anything major like who dies, who lives, all that sort of stuff. But there are a decent amount of character deaths, so you should be aware of that. All right, so I'll get into now why I read this gigantic novel. It's about 1,300 pages, which, if you're used to Cosmere books, is not that much longer, but it is much denser than a Cosmere book, which I'll get into what I liked about it. So why I read War and Peace. So I like history. I'm not like a history buff or anything. I like listening to podcasts and things like that. So when uh what's his face? When oh my god, the guy that made the new Napoleon movie, his name is Ridley Scott, obviously. When Ridley Scott made a new Napoleon movie, it kind of got me interested in it. I was like, oh, that's cool. I haven't really, that's like a section of history I don't really know about, besides like the big stuff. Like he went to Russia and lost, and Waterloo and lost, and stuff like that. So I knew a little bit of Napoleon, but not that much. So I was like, oh, that's going to be a really fun movie. And then it came out and just got like terrible reviews. It just got bombed. People said it was ahistorical, it was poorly acted, just not good at all. And I was like, damn. And but then in a lot of YouTube comments, they were recommending this movie called Waterloo from the 1970s, which is a very good movie, uh, starring Christopher Plummer as the Duke of Wellington, right? Um, and a bunch of other things. And it was directed by a Russian, actually. Rod Steiger. It's very good. It's from 1970s. It's on YouTube, so you should check it out if you're into Napoleon and history. It used like 30,000 Soviet troops as extras, so there's like actual, no CGIs in the 70s. So it's pretty well done if you're into the Battle of Waterloo, the single battle. But it was directed by a Soviet named Sergei Bondarchuk. FYI, I don't speak Russian. I'm going to butcher all these Russian names, and there's a billion of them. I know, like, Rostov and stuff like that, but anyone else, I'm going to butcher. But anyway, I watched that movie. It was really good. And he had directed the Russian War and Peace movie. It came out in 1965 and actually won an Oscar. So I was like, oh yeah, War and Peace. That's about Napoleon and stuff. And I just kind of went from there. Got put in my mind. I was like, hell, screw it, I'll read it. Why not? It's supposed to be really good and intimidating, and it'd be kind of funny if I read it. Because even though I read a lot of books, I have a podcast about it. I'm not a really big classics guy. Like, I haven't really read much American classics except for the ones that had to do for school. So I was like, yeah, let's read it. It's supposedly one of the best Western literature books. So I thought, why not? That's why I decided to read it in 2025 of my own volition, and I'm glad I did. So now I'm going to talk about what I liked about it. So in general, it's very well written. The translation I have is the Lewis and Elmer Maud translation. It seems to be good. Translations are hit and miss, but I feel like the language and the eloquence of it is still well preserved. You know, if only I could learn Russian real fast and read it in its original. But so I want to talk about the writing. The writing is excellent. A lot of good scenes and quotes and stuff. I'm not a big like prose guy. I could like tell you about the sentence structure and all that stuff, but in general, it's all good. There's a lot of good scenes in it. In particular, there's a couple scenes. There's a death scene later in the book that I won't spoil. That is one of my favorite character deaths scenes I've ever read. It's incredible. There's also a scene, it's not really a spoiler, but with Natasha, and she is dancing this Russian folk dance, and the way it's described and how she is doing the dance is beautiful and is very well done. But in general, it's well written. So just props on that. Obviously, I mean it's stood the test of time. So I'll say the battle scenes are immaculate. They're really good. All the big major battles. Once you get into character POVs, they're claustrophobic, confusing, but really exhilarating. They are very well done. You can definitely tell that Tolstoy was in actual combat because if they feel lived in. So that is a plus with the for the book. The battles are always engaging. At least for me, I like military history and stuff like that. So you do get a lot of tactics from the above view before you get into the character view. So you kind of know what's going to happen, and then it happens, and it's always exhilarating because you don't know because all the major characters that I'm going to get to shortly are made up. There are a lot of real people in this book. If you want to think about like Napoleon's in the book, a lot of the Russian generals are real people. The Tsar is a real person. Alexander. They're all real people, and generally, from what I can tell, it's fairly well represented in what actually happened. It was written like 50 years after this, so he probably had primary sources and things like that. So in general, the historical events are pretty well accurate, and the people that you meet that are real seem to, at least from what a little research I've done, act like they should. So the battles are really well done. I really enjoyed those. Now I'll get to the characters. So you have three central characters. Well, two central characters and kind of a family. So you have Pierre. He is this illegitimate child of a Russian noble. He's kind of very naive and kind of clumsy. He kind of bumbles his way throughout the thing, but he's one of your major characters. He ends up inheriting a lot of money from his dad. His dad makes him legitimate as he's dying. This happens in like the first couple of chapters. And he's kind of struggling with his life and kind of figuring out where to go. And he goes on a great journey, um, and it's very rewarding for him. He's a great character. He was not my favorite for a while, but he kind of grows on you because he's kind of a bumbling, kind of dumbass for most of the book. Um, but he is great. Then we have Prince Andre. Um, and the book, you just FYI, the book uses like prince and princesses and stuff. This is like the closest English word that they get used for that, but they're not actually like related to the czar or any of this monarchy type thing. It's like they're like basically like nobles, but they use prince and princesses. So you have Prince Andre. Um, he is very cool. He's like kind of more stoic. He has a wife at the beginning of the book who he does not like, so it gives him some conflict. He is also in the army where Pierre is not, and they're him and Pierre are great friends. And he is one of your main POVs in the battle scenes. And he is also, of course, because he's rich and stuff, he's in the nobility peace scenes as well. He's very complicated because he's also kind of dissatisfied with his life. A lot of this is like trying. A lot of this book is a lot of trying to find like satisfaction in your life and trying to figure out what you want to do and things like that. So that's kind of Prince Andre. He has a family that's really interesting. He has a sister that is like a woman of God. She's very kind of a very cool character. She kind of just always capitulates to people's desires for kind of suppressing her own, including mostly with her father, or Prince Andre's father as well, who is this old retired general, and he's very harsh and honestly kind of sucks. And you can see how he influences the two of them, and they kind of go on. He joins the army. He's at the Battle of Austerlitz. He's at the Battle of Borodino. So Prince Andre is really cool. Then you have kind of the third main section of characters, and this is the Rostov family. Notably, you have Natasha and you have Nicholas Rostov. Both are fairly major characters, even though they are minor than Andre and Prince Andrew. Andre and Pierre. My my books has him as Prince Andrew, but most of it has Andre, so I'm gonna try to read him as Andre. Um, Nicholas is kind of this a little bit older than Natasha. He ends up joining the army and going on a bunch of battles and things like that, learning the true horror of war. This book is a lot of like war is not a game. It's really awful. You get to see some of the real costs of war. But even though a lot of them try to have the glory, but they get to see the cost. So he's kind of the new kind of a grunt. He becomes a hussar, and he kind of does that. And he's one of your other POVs in the battle scenes, and also when everybody kind of revolves around the Rostov. So you'll have Pierre come in and talk with them, and Andre come in and do stuff like that. Then you have so he's really important. He's really a character. One of my favorite scenes is just the way it's written is that Nicholas he comes back from the Battle of I think it's the Battle of Austerlitz. But anyway, he gets into a gambling match with this other character. There's a lot of characters. I think it's Denisov. Um, but he ends up basically losing all the money his father gave him to uh, buy his like uniform and stuff like that. So he's all good up for like going on campaign. And the Rostovs are having some financial difficulties. They're a lord, but they're kind of a minor house, if you will. And they're not destitute, but close to becoming destitute. Anyway, there's this really wonderfully written scene where he has to go and tell his father that he needs more money because he lost it all in gambling. Um and it's just really well done. How it's like how he feels about it, approaching his father and all that stuff, and it's very good. And then you have kind of the final major character, even though there's so many characters, is Natasha Rostov. She's this kind of at the start of the book. She's a really young girl with like I think 13 or so, and you feel the he does a really good job of her feeling the life of like this excited young girl. She's a dancer, she loves to sing, and she just brings kind of the life whenever she's in the room and talking with the characters and things like that. And she's really wonderful, her growth throughout the thing as she, it's about a 10-year span, so she becomes, a woman and all that. There's lots of drama with her, with or certain loves and maybe eloptions and things like that. One thing I will say about this book is that it's not a dry book. Like, maybe probably wrongly, I associate a lot of classics with a lot of like dry, puritanical views of like, all these certain things, which maybe it's probably wrong. But this book has, duels and battles and eloptions and scandals and affairs and all sorts of stuff. So it's not a dry book by any means. Um, and yeah, so those are the chief characters. Like I said, there's hundreds of other ones that are really great that you can, fall in love with. I will say he does a really good job of making them all seem real and have flaws and character arcs and everything like that. Um, so yeah, that's the characters. And the plot I've already kind of explained it is kind of those three chief characters, um, or four characters going through the machinations of history with Napoleon and stuff screwing up their lives as they have to deal battle and love, but they also live life as stuff happening. So it's kind of like a slice of life with this impending doom of Napoleon coming through and interrupting their lives. So that's kind of the plot. And then you have, of course, like I said earlier, the historical kind of analysis and all that, and Tolstoy's own philosophy is kind of going through at the major sections of this book. So this book is done in it's done in parts, then books, then chapters. So it's like it would be like part one, book two, chapter three. And then when you get to be part, so usually each part, maybe each book will have a section before it starts detailing like history and kind of philosophy and stuff. I would not recommend skipping those, even though they can be a little much at times, but they do have good insights and they're necessary for the read. So I definitely recommend reading those. Um, so those are kind of the things that I liked about the book. The characters are all great. It's one of those things where at the end you kind of feel sad about leaving them because you've grown to know them so good. It does end at a pretty good place for them. Um, so, but it's one of those things where I could see myself rereading it as long as it is, just for the characters. And yeah, it was just really well done. The themes are really good about trying to figure out what you should do in your life, what you should how to love, about war and all its brutality and things like that. So I'm not gonna get too big into themes. I'm just not that big of a like theme getter. Like I don't really study it that much while I read. I read mainly for the enjoyment, and then I get the themes kind of through reading it, but I don't really discuss it that much. It's a very English class thing to do, but they are there. They're good, and I would recommend reading it yourself, and you can find all the themes you want. Um, but redemption of Pierre becoming a better man, all that sort of stuff is really good in there. So some of the bad things I didn't quite like. It's not too many. It's one thing is it's like I said, with the history and all those different sections, it's like unlike anything I've ever read before. So it took me a while to get into the flow of it. It starts a little slow while you're kind of learning all this stuff, similar-ish to like something like Game of Thrones, where you're thrown in and you have to remember all these hundreds of Russian names until you kind of figure out who you can kind of let go into the ether and who is actually important to the story. So it's a little bit of a slow start, and until you kind of figure out uh, what you uh, what you need to actually remember. Um, this is a book where I'll get to tips and reading it later, but yeah, it's a little rough. It is written. You can tell it's a different era of writing it because there's a decent amount of tell and not showing. Like he knew that he loved her instead of like showing that he loved her and stuff like that. So there'll be some of that stylistic choices that I feel a little archaic now, or at least just not really done that much anymore from what I've read. But there are a lot of beautiful prose and things like that. So I don't really have that much gripes with it. If I didn't like it, I would have stopped. I didn't I wasn't reading it for a podcast. I was reading it for myself. And if it was just not for me, I would have stopped. So I don't really have too many gripes about it. It was just really interesting and fun. So like I would approach it in that way of like trying to find it interesting and all the different ways it's written, like fascinating because like it opens up more things that authors could do. Like I don't know, like you could do a War and Peace for like I don't know the Iraq War or something like that, and it would probably be really good. You could do it for World War II or World War One. World War One would probably work the best because you'd have the uh, sense of impending doom with all these different families, and then it would be really tragic because World War One is awful. Um, but like you could do something like that, and it'd be really good. If somebody knows of a World War One book like this, hit me up. I'll read it. Um, but yeah, it's very well done. I don't really have too many complaints about it. I'm sure if like we did chapter by chapter breakdowns, I would have stuff to complain about, like normal. But as a whole, it lives up to me to its reputation of it's just a great work of literature. Um, and it expands your mind because it's just something different. It's not the modern day Sanderson. Like I talk about Sanderson a lot because we've been reading it, but like I just kind of inhale Sanderson because I know his prose and the way he writes a bunch. So sometimes it doesn't even feel like reading; it feels like it's being downloaded into my brain because it's just that easy for me to read it. But then I go to War and Peace, and it's challenging. It's interesting. It has different themes and things like that, and it has um so it has like things you need to look up because it was written in 1860s, and he had just things that were common that didn't need explaining. So I had to look up things. I had to look up words. I had to look up French because this one thing about this book is it has a decent amount of French in it and a decent amount of German. Way less German, but it has German in it. Um, and in my version, it's not translated. Um, I've heard that some other versions of the book have the French in footnotes, which I think would be uh, ideal. But it did force me to look up the French and kind of like learn a little bit of French. So that was kind of fun. Not that I know any French really, but just kind of like you can puzzle it out, and it really does give it a different feel because you're like all these Russian nobles know French and they're speaking French because of Napoleon and his influence on Russian culture and stuff because they're not at war with Russia with Napoleon for a large portion of this book. And so his dominance in Europe has spilled over to the Russian nobility. So I think it's really important and really cool as a lover of languages to get the French in this as well, and how it kind of does the cultures and all that other stuff. So that's another great part of this book. It's just kind of learning a little bit more languages. You don't really learn it, but you get exposed to it, which is fun. I like being exposed to different languages and cultures. And you get a very Russian culture, obviously, in this book. And has a very fascinating history. So learning a little bit of it in this book is also nice. So yeah, that's kind of what I like about it. Um, I Here's stop right here. I definitely recommend reading it. And now I'm going to give you some tips to read it. Because it is a behemoth of a book. This is only volume 3. So there's 2 others that are as big as this. This is like 800 pages, probably. That's 600 pages. It's around 1,300 page book. So, tips for reading War and Peace. Number 1 tip would be to go slow. This took me about a year to read. I was reading off and on with other books, some books for the podcast, some just for leisure. I'll go slow. It is a dense book, and like I said, it's very different from modern books. So take your time. Good thing is each chapter is relatively short, like 2 to like 6 pages or whatever. So if you just read like a chapter a day or a chapter every other day or whatever, it's very bite sized, and you can get through it fairly quick. I mean, if you do that, but it would gives you a definite finite definite point of ending your reading that is achievable and easy. When I first started reading this, I couldn't read more than like 20 pages a day. It was just so different, and I didn't get the style yet, things like that. So I was just like, my brain's kind of hurting from reading this. So I would put it down and pick it back up. But the short chapters make that easy to do, and you have definite points. Like, oh, I'm gonna read this chapter and I'm gonna stop. So that's a big point. Point 2 is the characters. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of Russians, and they all have the Russian names, and you're gonna have to like remember them and all that stuff. For me, it's kind of like the Game of Thrones theory. You pick the ones you think are going to be important, or the book tells you are going to be important, which will be fairly obvious if you've read a large epic like Game of Thrones or stuff like that. You'll have your main characters, you'll have some of your supporting characters, and you learn them. Try to just you could just look up their names, how it's pronounced, or just do what most of us did with fantasy and just have a name associated that is hopefully somewhat like their names in actual things. Like, I don't remember what my name for Hermione was, but it was definitely not Hermione. So, like Dokolov, I'm pretty sure is not how his name is said, but that's how I remembered it, and that's basically how it's spelled. So when he came around, I was like, oh, it's that guy that did this. And then you can like, so maybe take notes if you need to, but you only need to do it for maybe like 20 or 30 characters, if that are major. So just try to keep them in mind. Try to give them little nicknames if you want to remember them. But that's the thing. A third tip is keep your phone nearby you and look up stuff. One of the fun things about this book is it's written really old, a long time ago, and it has things that like words and customs and things that I didn't know about, or maybe uniquely Russian. Like there's this one word for like a how to port like a thing that held tea that I didn't know about. I forget the word now, but it was a Russian thing that is not in style anymore. And I looked it up. I was like, oh, that's cool. You can also look up some of the historical characters as they appear. Kind of get an idea of who they are. You can't really spoil yourself on them because it's history, unless you just don't want to know anything. But yeah, keep your phone nearby. Also, it's good in case your thing doesn't have the French translated to translate the French. I used an app called um, it was just a translator app. It was on Android, but you could take a picture and it would translate it. It did it pretty decent. If I needed to, I would type in the words if it didn't do it as well. But kind of as you go on, you kind of figure out. At least I did a little bit of the French to kind of just be like, do I need to translate this? This doesn't seem that important. It's a couple words. And you can kind of go through that. But yeah, keep your phone nearby. It was one of the only books in recent memory for me that I need to look up words, look up people, and things like that. And yeah, that's kind of my tips for reading it. Is kind of just go at your own pace. It's okay to take a year to read it. That's what I did. Another thing, I guess, read other things while you're doing it. You'll get less burned out by it. Be like, oh, I'm gonna read 3 chapters this week of War and Peace while I do other things. You'll still remember enough, at least I do, because I have a pretty good memory, that picking it up again won't be that bad. So, unless you just really enjoy it, then just go wild and go through it. But, yeah, that's kind of my tips for this. I would highly recommend it because it is really good. If you take anything away from my incoherent ramblings, I really enjoyed this book. It's one of my, if we're going to go standalone novels, not my favorite novel of all time, but it's up there. It's something you could think about while reading it, and you get a fun little achievement of having read Tolstoy, who's really good. Um, and final thoughts. So I watched part one of the 1965 Russian adaptation of it. Part one was very good. It seems to cover the book pretty well, like spot by spot. Um, it won an Oscar, so I'm guessing the rest of them were good. I do plan on watching the rest of them. There's 4 parts, so it is about probably 8 hours long, which is a long time for movies. But yeah, I haven't watched the BBC one. I've heard it's pretty good from just Reddit and stuff like that. But yeah, so if you don't want to read this behemoth, you can always watch it. Um, I recommend either of those. Um, Personally, I would like the 1965 Russian version, just because if you're gonna do an adaptation, I just like having the native country do the adaptation. I think it adds more authenticity of it. See, All Quiet on the Western Front. That movie was amazing, and just a lot of other things. So I recommend that one. It's on HBO Max. I think it's also on YouTube if you can find it. Just type in War and Peace 1965. And yeah, just just read it if you're interested. Um, it's very good. I think that's about it. Um, yeah. Thanks for listening to my ramblings. I hope you'll have a great day. Bye.